Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you're watching today us from. Thank you so much for joining our 19th edition of the CVC Insider. Today we have a very exciting session ahead. We will be hearing from Dina Routhier, president of Stanley Ventures, who prior to joining Stanley spent more than 25 years investing and acquiring technology companies throughout the United States. But before we get started, I wanted to quickly set the stage so you have some context. First of all, my name is Alba. I'm part of the 500 Startups platform. 500, we are one of the world's most active seed stage investors with over 2,500 direct investments in startups from 75 countries. Within 500, I'm the head of global innovation strategy, where I work closely with corporate investors and innovators to power their own innovation initiatives, partnerships, and investments into startups. And about 6 months ago, we started the CVC Insider event series as part of our efforts to build a stronger and more supportive ecosystem for startups and investors alike, allowing for connections to be made, insights and best practices to be shared. So if you'd like to connect with a community of over 1,000 investors from around the world, please feel free to shoot me an email that I'll be now dropping into the chat. And every 2 weeks, we host this roundtable featuring top corporate venturing practitioners and sharing their unique journey to CVC, specific challenges they faced, best practices that they've collected along the way. So if you'd like to nominate any speaker to this series, please feel free to let us know. And today, our host, Nicolas Sauvage, will be moderating the discussion. But there's also a Q&A function, so feel free to ask any questions that you may have along the way. So now that you know what's going on, I'm going to hand it over to Nicolas. Nicolas, take it away.
Today, I'm very happy to have Dina joining us to be our next CVC Insider practitioner of corporate venturing. And she has a really good journey to share with us, including a very recent promotion she will, I'm sure, talk about, and we will be able to double click on it. Dina, if you don't mind, maybe 5-10 minutes sharing your personal journey into corporate venturing. Thank you.
Of course. Hi, Nicolas. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk about Stanley Ventures. So let's see, 5 to 10 minutes feels like a long time to talk about oneself, but let's see. I started my career actually as a commercial lender at a bank, at Bank of America. So in '95, I was classically credit trained on how to structure senior debt loans to high-tech companies. And I did that for about 5 years. And then I moved over to a Massachusetts-based Evergreen early stage venture fund. And so it is still, it's called Mass Ventures. It's still active. And its whole goal really is primarily economic development in the state of Massachusetts, making sure that the innovation ecosystem in the Massachusetts area stays vibrant, that it stays a place where early stage entrepreneurs want to start their companies and grow their companies. And so that is really where I started my VC journey. I was there for 12 years. And I learned how to do early stage investing very much in an apprenticeship style. So I shadowed the president of that organization, took board meetings, and through the structuring of early stage investments and what to look for in promising startup companies. So I did that for 12 years. I did a ton of investments while I was there, got a ton of board experience and loved it. I really did enjoy my time. And I've always lived and worked in Boston. And so through those 12 years, I was able to really see my network of entrepreneurs and venture capitalists flourish, not only in Massachusetts, but also nationwide. And so that's what I did for 12 years, and I loved that. And after 12 years, let's see, I was at this point in my life where I had a baby, and she had turned 5, and she had to go to school every day. You know, I had delivered her into the school system at that point, and I felt like I had a little bit more sort of freedom to think about what I wanted to do in the next chapter of my life. And at just about that time, a design software company called Autodesk, it's a publicly traded company, came knocking on my door to see if I wanted to learn a new skill. And that skill was mergers and acquisitions, also known as corporate development. And so I felt like I had learned everything I really could learn at Mass Ventures. And so I jumped to that new opportunity. And that was in, I'm trying to think, 2011. And so I went over to Autodesk, and I learned a new skill set at that point in my life, which was how to structure and execute on M&A transactions. And that's really what I did for the 5 years, primarily what I did at Autodesk for 5 years. I structured and closed 10 acquisitions while I was there. I will say 9 out of my 10 transactions were sub $20 million purchase price acquisitions. So I was still working with early stage companies, many of which were doing, less than 5 million in revenue. Some were profitable, but not all. And so it was interesting to see how that one company utilized and still utilizes, I think, the tool of M&A to stay at the forefront of technology innovation. And so their goal was tech and team over and over, which is a very different way that the current company I work for, Stanley Black & Decker, utilizes M&A, but we can talk about that if you'd like. While I was there, I also did do a couple of corporate strategic investments. Although at that time, at least, Autodesk didn't have a fund, didn't have a specific strategy for CVC at that time, but we would do them opportunistically. And so I was able to close 2 investments while I was there.
Very nice.
Yeah, so I was there for 5 years, and then I moved over and I said, you know what, I'm glad I've added this core skill set to my resume, but I miss early stage investing, right? I realized sort of the grass wasn't greener, right? In that I had already found something in my life that I really liked to do and had become decently good at. And then I found the opportunity at Stanley Ventures, and that was in 2017. And I came on as an investment director here in the Boston office. I was the 3rd person that filled this role in Boston in about 3 years. So it took them a little while to find the right person to fit the culture and role. And I joined the company at that point and started doing early stage investments on behalf of Stanley Ventures. And that was 2017. And I remember the first year that I was here, I had my first review with my boss, and my predecessor's name is Larry Harper. And he said, okay, well, what's your 5-year plan? And I said, honestly, my 5-year plan is to have your job. I mean, that is what I'd like to do at some point. So if at some point, you want to move on and try something new, please do let me know, because I want to throw my hat into the ring. Little did I know that COVID would hit, and I think that would spur my supervisor, my boss, to say, okay, maybe I want to do something new at this stage of my life. Maybe I want to retire and enjoy life. So he decided to do that in August of last year, and he came to me and he said, would you like to throw your hat into the ring? I know that's what you'd like to do. And I said, yes, please, I'd love to do that. And I interviewed, and then I was given the position in December of this year. So I've been running the team since that point. And here we are.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Super fun.
No, it's really good. I also really like that you went for it. You were very clear you wanted it, and you made it clear. This is really good. Thank you, Dina. So many things I want to talk about, but let's start with the early stage investment, because this is clearly a very strong experience you had. And what's interesting is that as you move to the M&A team, you still got 9 out of 10 of the acquisition in the early stage type of companies. How much of that is maybe a bias towards what you really love to do? And how much of that is exactly what your company needed, which was to really get these early stage innovations into the mothership?
Sure, it definitely was what the company wanted. It was what Autodesk's strategy was. And so I just think probably when they were interviewing me, they saw that that could be a good fit, that I wasn't somebody that came in from an investment bank and knew how to execute on $100 million transactions, which is a very different type of transaction than a tech and team early stage transaction. And so that's really where it came from. I'd like to say it was because that's what I had a bent towards, and that I could cause them to go in that direction, but that was their direction, to be clear.
Very nice. And what's your view on the M&A teams themselves of companies like Autodesk? Because at the end, most M&A teams I know, they think about acquiring very mature businesses. Mm-hmm. Here you talked about actually 9 out of 10, so let's say the big majority was in the early stage. Yeah. Do you think that you actually have different skills within the M&A team if you want to be able to do both type of acquisitions? Or do you think one M&A team is capable to do both?
Sure. I definitely think that the skill set needed to do the smaller tech and team acquisitions is very different than the skill set that's needed to do the large, $100 million transactions, because the ones here, the $100 million transactions where the companies you're acquiring have scale and have a financial history of profitability. It's really all about financial engineering. You know, how can we put these two companies together and extract the financial synergies that can come by way of putting them together? There's a lot of Excel spreadsheet modeling, which is very complex, which I found I'm not that amazing at. I think it's definitely a skill to be a true spreadsheet jockey. You really kind of need to learn that at the beginning of your career. I feel like you need to do 2 years of in-depth, like that is all you do. Whereas the core skill set, I think, to do the smaller tech and team acquisitions are very much like the skill set that is needed to do early stage investing, sort of that pattern recognition towards the quality of the teams, the quality of the technology, the IP protection, and really figuring out how that innovation could fit into the technology strategy of the business units that you're supporting. So in my opinion, they're two very different skill sets. I'll leave it at that, I guess. Yeah.
No, intuitively, it makes a lot of sense. In a way, every M&A is art and science, but clearly more early stage is more art and science and mechanical aspects, financial calculations for late stage. One maybe you can talk about is early stage acquisition is also more fragile when it goes into the mothership. How did you help these 9 early stage acquisitions really go and work well and grow inside the mothership while they were still early stage?
So I will say that I did not have the opportunity to work on the integration phase of the acquisition. So I would take it from discovery all the way to close of the transaction. And then Autodesk had a great integration team where that is all that they did. And I would say the success or failure of any acquisition, whether it be a small one or a large one, really rests with that integration team, right? That is where you extract the strategic value and where the rubber meets the road. So that is an entire career choice that someone could make and really build an entire career around that skill set of integration. So I was able to see it. You know, I was able to observe it be completed, but I didn't have to do it myself. So I can't speak too much about it.
Okay, but you were in the loop. You could still help.
Yes.
Okay.
So yes, I was absolutely in the loop, and I saw some go well and some not go well, as you would imagine, right? And I think it has to do with, at least for the tech and team acquisitions, it largely had to do with keeping those teams excited about what they were working on post-acquisition, right? And what I would see sometimes is you had super entrepreneurial founders, right? If you're a CEO of an early stage company, you love that, right? You live it, you eat it, you breathe it, right? And you move fast. You wear a lot of hats and you move fast. If you get swallowed up by a large company, what they would often experience is sort of like death by meeting or death by process. Like this is something that they don't naturally fit into. Some of the founders could make that change and make that leap and integrate themselves well into a larger company. Others just bristled at that. To them, they felt stifled. And no matter what you do as the acquirer, sometimes you can't do it. You can't do enough. Nothing you do would be able to make that entrepreneur happy. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just their DNA is such that they need to go out and do it all over again. And you have to respect those people. So that's a little perspective there.
And so maybe I feel like we're going into a golden nugget from your 9 acquisitions when you were still in the exploration phase of an acquisition, not once you decided, but at the time you were deciding. Are there tales that told you, yes, this is going to work, or some you were like, I'm not so sure?
I think to observe the interactions through the diligence process of the leadership team of the startup, and at least at Autodesk, it was the product management and technical team. If there was great chemistry and alignment on what the go forward plan should be for that technology we were acquiring, that had more of a chance to succeed, right? Another interesting thing I found some of the entrepreneurs doing was, and I think this is so smart of them, so they start this great company, they grow it, and then they sell it to Autodesk. Then they stay inside that company for a while, and it's while they're in that company, they have a bird's eye view of the problems that that larger company is facing and needs to solve. And then what I would see them do, a few of the really smart ones, they go out, they leave Autodesk and they go out and they start a new company to solve that problem and then sell their next company to Autodesk, which I just think is such an amazing and smart way for entrepreneurs to figure out what they should be going after. What's the next great idea? They don't have to think of it themselves. They can go inside, identify what it is, then come outside and solve it.
It's actually a beautiful process. And it's even, you could argue it's not a process you can actually plan for Autodesk, but it's clearly a good process because the entrepreneur going out will have ability to explore and test ideas way faster than he could inside Autodesk,
right?
Get the market fit, and then come back.
Exactly. And what I really commended Autodesk for was maintaining those strong relationships. No hard feelings if that founder wants to go back out, but we want to keep them in the fold because they're going to continue to solve problems that we have. So really smart corp dev team over there. They continue to do great acquisitions, and it continues to be a core, what I can see from the outside, it continues to be a core part of their strategy, and they do it well.
Okay, so that will be a golden nugget, which is no hard feelings. It's actually good, and you should impress the entrepreneurs. I want to move now to the Evergreen experience you had. So these 12 years working for an Evergreen fund. First, what do you think is a best advantage of an Evergreen, and what is a limitation of an Evergreen fund?
Sure. So the great part of the Evergreen fund, as long as you can make successful investments and exit them, you don't have to go out and raise money every 5 years, right? From a bunch of limited partners. So that's a really nice part of working for an Evergreen fund. The challenge comes when you don't time things absolutely correctly and you don't have the exits coming in to replenish the fund, right? That is the challenge. So there could be a couple of years while I was at Mass Ventures and we would do one new investment because we were waiting. We had some great companies in the portfolio, but we hadn't exited them yet. And so you could have really slow periods where, and if you're a deal doer who likes to do deals, hunt new deals and become part of syndicates, that can become frustrating. And that was a big thing that frustrated me there, was that waiting, right?
I see.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's frustrating for your partners as well, because they bring you very good deals and you're like, I love it, but I can't.
Right. Right. Not good if you're trying to really develop a reputation in the market as somebody who's writing checks, always writing checks, and always interested in new things. So that is a challenge.
So in a way, there is a reserve discipline for a fund. You keep a significant percentage for follow-on investments. But for an Evergreen fund, it's not you have a reserve for a certain number of portfolio companies. It's forever. So what kind of best practice would you recommend for a corporate VC who wants to do an Evergreen fund in terms of keeping enough reserve that you can do the follow-on, you can do new investments?
I think it's just always keeping a really close eye on the companies you have in your portfolio and what their anticipated next funding events are expected to be. Figuring out what your likely pro rata will be at that planned size, right? And then making sure that you are doubling down, that you're culling the portfolio in a very disciplined way, such that you're doubling down on your potential winners, and you're basically deciding what you're not going to do, right? And in some of these things, really, you can see in the first few years whether or not they have a good chance of making it. And then you have to make those hard decisions and say, okay, these 3 companies, we're going to make sure we have the reserves to follow on. And we're just going to have to, say no to the other ones in terms of follow on. So you have to be very disciplined.
And I think that is true for fund-based corporate VCs. But I feel like on top of that good discipline you just mentioned, you need to have an eye on when the exits are likely to happen, because that will replenish your reserve. Yep. And if it doesn't replenish your reserve, you probably need to be even more strict about where you do follow or when you do new investments.
Very true. Very true. And I mean, the best laid plans, right, oftentimes don't come to fruition. What should seem like there should be an IPO in 2 years, for a million reasons, could be delayed another 2 years. So it's a challenge. Managing an evergreen fund is absolutely a challenge.
All right, thank you. Now, I think from all the people we've interviewed so far, you're probably the one with the most experience on early stage investment, spending so much time doing that and focused on it, including an M&A where you did early stage acquisitions. So I would like to hear from you. What do you think are the things to really watch for an early stage investment? What would be the top 3 things that you want the audience to know? Okay, when you do an early stage investment, that are the 3 things I always care about.
Sure, they're the typical ones that you would think, right? But I'm always harping on quality of management team. Does this management team bring, number one, the domain expertise that will allow them to avoid as much as possible the pitfalls that they're likely to avoid? And do they come with the connections in the network that will allow them to do the early stage go-to-market efforts effectively? And do they have high integrity? Do they have high integrity? Do they have that stick-to-itness, right? And do I believe that I can live and work with this management team? Because it's like a marriage, as we all know, right? Through the ups and the downs of the early stage years. To me, I'm always harping on my team. What is the quality of the management team? Would we be proud to have this management team in our portfolio? That's one. The second one, of course, is TAM, right? Is this company addressing a very large TAM? And then, of course, being a corporate strategic investor, my third question is, what is the strategic alignment to one or more of our business units? How can we utilize the relationship and the commercial partnership that we almost always have accompany our investments? How can we utilize that commercial partnership to grow new innovative sources of revenue for Stanley Black & Decker? So those are the 3 main things. Of course, there are so many more, but if I had to stop at 3, that is what I'd say.
So I'm very interested. You started with domain expertise. Sometimes you have startups that comes and the management is great and they're trying something completely new. They were in technology for not a consumer product, and then they move into consumer product, or they were not in medical and they move in medical. Is domain expertise really a must for you, or can you see some of the skill transition as something that can work out?
It's super important to me. Domain expertise is super important to me. You have the outlier founders that have proven themselves to be able to move from industry to industry successfully. If you have somebody with that track record, then that would be an exception, right?
Okay.
But other than that, I really feel strongly about that domain expertise, because without it, it's hard to anticipate how your customers may want to buy your solution, right? And that's half the problem, right? You may have an amazing solution that solves somebody's problem, but if you're not selling it to them in the way that they want to buy it, success will be elusive, I think.
Yeah. And you mentioned domain expertise and connections, and that leads to the go-to-market. So it really makes sense, and I like you're very opinionated about domain expertise. The second thing you mentioned is integrity. And there's no doubt you need it for a startup that you invest your capital from your mothership. But how do you assess integrity when you have so little time to actually make a due diligence? And of course, you can spend 200 hours in a due diligence, but integrity is really, really hard to touch. So how do you do it? What best practices?
Yeah, of course, we do the standard background reference checks through our legal team, right? We do that. But the reality is, to have experienced deal doers and experienced early stage investors on your team who have been doing it for a while, there is that pattern recognition that comes. You have those scars on your back of working with startups that have a management team that turned out not to have the integrity you would want them to have. And so I hate to say it's an intuition, and to some extent, but it's more pattern recognition, right? When you have a startup that you're speaking with say certain things that clearly are overzealous or overstated, those are sort of key signs, key red flags for me. I'd rather have an entrepreneur in front of me who's just very measured and you can tell is of the type that will underpromise and overdeliver. That's really what I'm looking for.
I think the last one is really important. And you're right, it's pattern recognition, but you come with your own domain expertise. You can tell when someone is bluffing or not, or worse. So that makes sense. And you also mentioned making sure it's a strategic fit for Stanley Black & Decker. And you mentioned commercial partnerships. So the first part of my question is, how do you define strategic fit? Mm-hmm. And then the second part of my question would be about the commercial partnership, but I think that's a longer answer. How do you define strategic fit?
Sure. So the way we work is each member of our team develops a primary relationship with one of our business units and becomes essentially part of that business unit, not organizationally, but like in terms of how we function. So we attend their strat meetings. We speak to the senior management team members of those business units day in and day out. And through those, the building and the maintenance of those relationships, we know exactly what they're looking for, right? We know where their gaps are and where they'd like us to look. And it is with those marching orders that we go out into the market and look for startups that could potentially meet those needs, right? So that's what I mean when I say strategic fit. But our mandate at Stanley Ventures is really clear. It is to invest in early stage companies where we can form a mutually beneficial partnership, which will generate new sources of revenue for Stanley Black & Decker. And so you won't see us making investments in startups. I have to pass on some super interesting investment opportunities, say for great industry 4.0 startups, right? I've had to pass on several of those because we can't generate new sources of revenue for them. Indirectly, we can, because we can utilize the technologies in our own operations to make our own operations way more efficient, but it doesn't strictly fall into the definition of what Stanley Ventures has been created to do. So what ends up happening with those startups, when I meet them, I say, oh goodness, I can't invest in them, but I introduce them to the key operators within our global ops team and our industry 4.0 team, and we end up becoming huge customers of those companies. And so that's how that often works out.
Okay, I really like this binary criteria, source of revenue. I think it's extremely crisp and actually very, very refreshing to be so crisp. If it was a startup that would help save cost or improve margins, would that qualify, or it's really about incremental revenue?
To date, we have not made an investment for that reason. We have not made an investment. We may in the future. There may be one that is just so fundamentally transformational for our operations that we just can't resist. But up until this point, we've stayed true to that mandate. Other than that mandate, the only exceptions to that mandate are a few Horizon 3 investments we have made specifically for learning purposes. And those few startups that we've done for that reason, those investments that we've done for that reason, we have a commercial agreement, but it's very light. It says something like, you will agree to provide us, 50 sample parts in the next year at our request, and you will agree to meet with us twice a year so we can discuss your technology roadmap. Because what we're trying to do there is learn about a space that we know could be transformational for Stanley, but we're not quite sure exactly how we're going to capitalize on that opportunity. And additive manufacturing is a perfect example. We've made several investments in the additive manufacturing space specifically for learning.
And how do you, for these ones, how do you share these learnings back to Stanley Black & Decker in a way that is actionable?
Sure. So the main way that we do it is through our Stanley Black & Decker Technology Council. And that is a council that is run by our Chief Technology Officer, Mark Mayberry. It meets on a monthly basis, and the attendees of that, there are probably 50 or 60 people in that monthly tech council meeting, and they are all the top innovators across the company. And so what we often do is we will either have a Stanley Ventures team member come back with a summary of sort of what we've learned in the additive manufacturing space over the last 3 years, or more often than not, we actually have one of our portfolio companies, and specifically those Horizon 3 learning portfolio companies, come in and present. And that's the main way we do it. There are so many other ways that I'd like to add, but that is the main way we've done it to date.
So let me double click. Which other ways would you like to do and you might do in the future?
Sure. Some suggestions I've had are, our monthly newsletters, right? So right now I don't have a great marketing function in my organization proper to really do that outward. This is what we've done over the past month at Stanley Ventures, and this is what we've learned over the past month. I don't have those great marketing touch points in place today, and I'd like to add that. That's just one example. I'd like to have a lookbook, right? I don't have a lookbook of all of my portfolio companies with a snazzy one page. This is the original invested under, and this is how it's come to fruition. I want that. That's happening for my summer intern this summer. She doesn't know it yet, but that's one of her projects. So a lot of stuff on the marketing side are things that I'd really like to help us jazz up our communication of those learnings.
But yeah, I think what you mean by marketing is actually improving the storytelling.
Yes. You're saying perfectly.
Yeah, that's very nice. Now let's talk about commercial partnership, because some corporate VCs don't insist and some do. And from those that do, some do it very badly and some do it very well. And so I want to hear from you the best practices of building a commercial partnership which really adds value to the startup.
Sure. Yeah, it's not easy. It's definitely it's another type of art, right? And it is a needle that we need to thread very carefully each time, in the sense that there's a belief at Stanley that if we're going to invest and become not only a shareholder but also a commercial partner of that early stage company early on, and bring all of the assets of Stanley to bear on that startup to help them thrive, right? So the things that we bring are our amazing brands, right? So often in our commercial partnership, we will allow that early stage company to rebrand their solution under one of our brands that we've invested in for decades, and will bring a huge amount of value to that company. And then we will agree to utilize our existing sales channels, either our direct sales teams or our great retail distribution channels, to help that company distribute its technology, right? So we really feel like we should get something in exchange for that, but there's a needle that you have to thread that needle such that you ask for some commercial rights, which sort of compensate you for all that you're bringing to the table while not stifling the growth of the startup. And that can be hard to do, right? So what we will ask for in certain instances are some certain time-bound exclusivities in a particular part of our market in exchange for our guarantee of specific purchases or sell-through of their solutions. That's the main thing that we will often ask for in our commercial partnerships. We don't utilize our investments as a M&A pipeline at Stanley Black & Decker. So we don't ask for things like rights of first refusal or rights of first notice. Things like that are not critical for us. It's more that little competitive advantage that we want vis-a-vis a small subset of competitors for a specific period of time. So you can see how that is it's a tightrope that you have to walk to make sure that you're getting compensated for all the great things you're bringing to the table, while also putting your investor hat on and making sure that you are leaving a significant amount of the startup's TAM available for them to go capture. So the best deals that we do are startups that have great, amazing technology, but they're focused over here. Like their entree into the market has been focused over here, say in insurance or something like that. And you say, wow, we could utilize that same technology. I know it sounds crazy, but in power tools. And they say, well, we didn't even think of doing that, nor did we ever intend to put any resources behind that effort. And we say, well, let us go do that for you. In exchange, give us a couple of years of exclusivity so we have a little bit of a head start against our competitors. That's the perfect deal. Not easy to find.
It's a perfect deal because it's all upsides. It's upside for you, it's upside for mothership, it's upside for the startup. It's also I think you talk about the thread. I see it as a balancing act. You need to make sure this is a win-win that doesn't become a weak win. And so over the course of the years, is there something that you have improved in building this commercial partnership, or explaining them, or selling them, that maybe you were not doing so well earlier on and now you have really perfected?
It's probably too simplistic to say, but we've learned how to walk that tightrope much more carefully, to not overstep our asks, because we maybe experienced in a couple of the deals very early on in our life, and we're just 5 years old as a CVC unit. So just to be clear, we're not. I sort of think of us as a tween, right, in our lifestyle. In our life cycle. Excuse me. We've done 39 deals. We've learned enough to be dangerous, but we definitely have improvements that we could make, right? So experiencing maybe early on a few deals where we may have asked for too much and then struggled, as we should have been able to see, we would have struggled convincing follow-on investors to come in. Well, of course, we're going to struggle to convince follow-on investors to come in if we've tied the startup's hands too much. So it's through those early learnings that allowed us, I believe, to get much better at really inking those truly mutually beneficial commercial partnerships.
That is a golden nugget. I think that's really, really helpful advice, not to be very careful about your ask and think long term what that means versus just what it means in the next 6 months.
Right.
Last time we talked, that was for an interview for Global Corporate Venturing. We talked about your desire to improve the portfolio management. Can you talk about how important portfolio management is, and what do you think are the things that you really want to improve and make your mark on?
Sure. And to be very clear, I'm still working on that, Nicolas. But my vision at this point for sort of Stanley Ventures 2.0, how we evolve from here, we have 4 what I think are very strong deal doers, people who know how to find the opportunities, structure great investments, walk that tightrope in creating the mutually beneficial commercial partnership, and we have 1 analyst. So that is what we have: 4 deal doers, including myself, and 1 analyst. What we don't have is what I think is, well, we don't have today, and what I think is extremely critical for our long-term success in adding value to Stanley Black & Decker, is to create what's called a CVBD function, right? A business development function, a platform team whose sole job it is to take the amazing deals that we close and then help our business units extract the maximum strategic value from those portfolio companies. I do not have that today. I am on a mission over the next few years to make sure that we build that here at Stanley Black & Decker. I'm excited to see how you do it at TDK. We can talk offline and maybe do some best practices there. But that is truly what I think that we need to do at Stanley Ventures to see Stanley Ventures 2.0.
Just to give a feel, because that will follow to my next question, how big is Stanley Black & Decker in terms of number of employees, number of offices? I mean, is it very diverse all over the world? I assume so, but...
It is. We're all over the world. We're worldwide. We do about $14.5 billion in revenue, US dollars, top line. We have multiple business units, including, of course, people know our global tools and storage business unit. So we have 50 amazing brands like Craftsman and DeWalt and Mac Tools and Proto, and I could go on. And that's that's over 10 billion of the $14.5 billion in revenue. Then we have a commercial security integration business. So you could sort of think ADT, but for large commercial accounts. We are the 2nd largest commercial security integration business in the world. That's about 2 billion in revenue. We have a large industrial business, which is about 2.3 billion in revenue. And within that umbrella, we have an engineered fastening business, which is about less than a $2 billion business, but they make millions and millions of these little self-piercing rivets, as well as the assembly systems to hold all of the pieces of a car together, for example, or an airplane, right? So, and then we have a healthcare business. We have a digital healthcare business, which is within our security. So we are all over the map, as you can. We have power tools, hand tools. We have about 55,000 employees across the globe, 30,000 of which are in our manufacturing facilities. We have over 120 manufacturing factories across the globe. We have a mission to, over the last few years, to bring as much of our manufacturing onshore as possible. So Made in America is a big part of many of our tools brands and really resonates well with our customers. And so to deliver on that, we have been bringing more and more of our manufacturing onshore. So we're a large company.
Very large, all over the map. It sounds very much like TDK. When we started this function, and we started it from day one, so we were lucky to start right away, I think one of the criteria was to have someone well connected to many of these teams. And so we ended up with someone from TDK headquarters in corporate planning who had been working with so many teams. Well, for investment directors, we were thinking about people who are external, who have no filters about what TDK would become. So I wonder, so I would advise you to think about someone internal, but who has been really connected to so many teams and who is well liked, who has built goodwill. I think that's probably a good first employee. Beyond that, I think this is for us to learn. We really are also learning.
Okay, so you haven't built that yet within your organization?
So we have one person, which is Toshi, a startup liaison. So we decided to name it Startup Liaison because we really wanted to first say this is entrepreneurs first. So it's about the startup, liaising to the many TDK teams. But we have one, but it was right from day one.
It's great. Smart.
So good. I think, so what would be your top goal for this CVBD function or team 2 years down the line? Clearly the first year will be connecting, but 2 years down the line, what could be a KPI that's measurable and you feel like, yes, I have succeeded building this function?
Sure. I mean, I have a whole job description for this person. I have people like within the organization that I've already targeted to bring on when the right time comes. But they would have multiple jobs, right? One is largely that storytelling job, right? Making sure that everybody across the organization knows the wins that we're having in our portfolio, both strategically as well as financially. Doing postmortems, right? Being very transparent across the organization about specific maybe deals or corporate arrangements that didn't go well and why, and analyzing those so that we don't make the same mistakes again. I think that's critical and not something that we've done to date programmatically. And then very importantly, I want this person to do things like run quarterly technology summits, right? Where we bring the key innovators at Stanley together with a subset of the portfolio companies to continue to figure out how we can bring our great assets to bear and help those companies. I want them to run a technology summit just for the portfolio companies once a year so they can learn from each other. I have all of these ideas on what I want that individual to do, but the one thing I forgot to mention is the main thing is to make sure post-investment that the commercial agreement KPIs are on track and that we're hitting them. So to be that liaison with the business unit leads to say, this is what we said we were going to do by Q2. How are we doing? How are we tracking against that goal? And if we're off, how do we right ourselves? That's the primary thing actually that individual will do. And all the other stuff is extra, but you can see it's an all-encompassing role and probably not one that can be accomplished by one individual, which is why you need a team.
Yep. And hopefully the likely employees are listening to this video and get really inspired because that's a role that could have so much impact.
Absolutely, no question. I think I was speaking to Tammy, who has run Intel Capital CVB teams for about 24 years, I learned. And so she's done that for 24 years and she's had an amazing career and she's built, I think she has 12 people under her, all of whom have built amazing careers doing just this. So.
Yeah, no, it's huge impact. You can make the right decision to invest in the right company for the right reasons. If you don't deliver on the value, you kind of lost the point about investing in the first place.
I think the CVBD team, much like I think of the integration team for M&A, right? That is where the rubber meets the road and where you really can get the most value. So they're critical members of the team.
Totally agree. So we're talking about making investments. So let's talk about your investment process, decision making, investment committee. Clearly, you talked about champions in business units. How do you get your investment from, let's say, A to Z? So you have the deal flow, it comes to you. How do you go into making an investment decision? You want to make the investments and then get it approved and then close the deal.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So say an investment opportunity that is applicable to our tools team comes in through me, through you.
Okay, I like that.
I would route it through Mike Mahan on my team, who is my primary for our tools business, and he would route it to the right person within the tools business. And so the deal team is defined, the deal team within the business unit who sort of do the baking of the recipe early, in the early process, are the key technical person, the key product / commercial person, and then Mike, right? So it's those three people really putting the meat on the bones and determining the strategic fit. If that strategic fit is determined to be real and a mutually beneficial commercial partnership is possible, we draft an early stage non-binding letter of intent. And that letter of intent has one section that talks about high level about the investment terms. And then section 2 really talks high level about what are the key commercial terms we'd like to extract and provide as part of this partnership. We negotiate that with the startup, hopefully very quickly, get a signature from both of us, and it's that signed letter of intent that allows us the ability to go to initial investment committee. And our initial investment committee is essentially our CEO, our CTO, our CFO, and a few other people, a few other critical people, general counsel, and a couple of others. And we get approval, initial approval, and that gives us the right to go into deep dive diligence as well as contracting. That usually lasts about 3 weeks. And then we are parallel processing the contracting with the diligence so that once that process is over, we do a quick go back to the same investment committee to say, this is what we found in diligence, here are any red flags, or everything is a green light, let's move forward. They opine on that final investment committee and we close. So that is high level how our process works. As you can imagine, most of the time is spent up front in that crafting of the commercial partnership. And what I forgot to mention is oftentimes in that pre-LOI phase, we're doing a proof of concept. So so most of the time happens in that early stage baking part.
Okay. So when you go to the initial investment committee, you're already convinced you should go ahead, bearing some red flags you would discover later.
Correct. Yes. And hopefully, well, not hopefully, I make sure that our business unit presidents are pre-selling that opportunity up to the investment committee, sort of back channeling, pre-selling, all of that stuff, so that when I get there, it's not really the first time our investment committee has heard it. That's my goal.
Okay, so you prime the initial investment committee. What's nice about what you mentioned is you really have the top people in that investment committee. I mean, this is the people who decides what happens to the company. And so that I think is interesting, because when you do the 3 weeks, check everything, you already have the backing of the top of the company to say, yes, this is strategic, this makes sense, we want this commercial partnership. When you go back, have you ever had some surprises?
I'm trying to think, during my time, have we ever gone back for final and not been approved? No, but what I will say has happened is after initial, we may get blocked out of the deal by other syndicate partners. That has happened. Yep. Also happened between initial and final is the startup decided to take an acquisition offer instead of taking investment. So that has happened. And so more often than not, the situation can be that I have to explain why the company I brought for initial, I'm not bringing for final. So that's certainly happened in the past. But I've never found anything, a red flag that we couldn't work our way through yet. It may happen, but yeah. I don't recall a time yet.
Okay, so I think your process sounds very similar to what we do at CVC Ventures, except we don't have the quick go back. So what we do is everything you've described, and then we say, please approved, and assuming no red flags, sometimes it could be CFIUS, some it could be something else. Assuming no red flags, we will proceed. And so if there was red flags, we could decide not to go back, but we don't need to go back if no red flags.
I like that. I'll have to think about that. Maybe I have to make a little change.
Well, it's also, I mean, you're talking about very senior people in the organization, and the go back is more of a good feeling meeting in a way where you say, yeah, you were correct 3 weeks ago. This is exactly what you want. Yeah, okay. So I think it's very interesting. And the president of the business unit, is he a vote in the investment committee, or is he the one that sells it with you to the investment committee?
He or she will sell it with me. So they are standing next to me. And actually, I will even make them present a couple of slides, because it is, I will say, it is that I can sell the deal 6 ways to Sunday, but it is that final comment and show of support by, you know, the individual that's running the $10 billion P&L that really closes the deal, to be honest, right?
Yeah, and given your criteria of source of revenue, that has a lot of weight for the president of the business unit to say, yes, I need this investment, I will learn, this creates new opportunities for revenue. So I think your criteria also drives this process that makes a lot of sense. I think
thank you for saying that. I do think the place where we do struggle, however, is because of that strong bent towards looking for investment opportunities that can generate revenue. I wouldn't say struggle, but it's a challenge to get the BU presidents to put their stamp of approval on something that's further out. Right. So what I have found is that oftentimes our learning investments have to be sponsored not by a BU president so far, but by corporate. Sometimes our CEO or our CFO themselves will say, this is something we need to have our finger on the pulse of, and corporate will sponsor it. I'd like to change that a bit. I'd like to figure out a way to convince the BU presidents that it's important to do the Horizon 1 investments, but it's just as important to make a few select bets on those potentially transformational technologies, which could either potentially disrupt us or be new, huge parts of opportunity for us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's the challenge of business units who have huge pressure to deliver in the next 12 or 24 months. And what I've discovered is it really depends on people. We have our current CEO of InventSense, Amir Panush. He's really deliver today, but think about the future. So I can have that discussion with him. That's not true for every head of business units. I want to talk about the interactions you have with the M&A team, because clearly this is a big partner of yours. What best practices would you recommend in this partnership, in this engagement with the M&A team and the CVC?
So I would say for us, it's not as applicable because we don't utilize the ventures team as a funnel towards M&A, as a pipeline towards M&A. We have worked with them in the cases where we have acquired 2 of our portfolio companies. One we did not have, we didn't anticipate we'd acquire, but decided to later. It helped us move into a new adjacent market, and one which we actually did intend to acquire from the beginning. And so I just think it's important to have strong relationships with the individuals from the M&A team. I will say this, the Ventures group, my direct supervisor is the head of all M&A at Stanley Black & Decker. So it's not difficult to maintain that relationship. But I just think it's all, for us, it's all about making sure that that team has visibility into what we're doing and which portfolio companies could potentially end up as M&A candidates, so that they're specifically watching that portfolio company's progress. They don't have to watch all the other 36 of them, but if there are 2 that are potential M&A candidates, so that they're watching their progress.
Okay, very nice. And then I saw on LinkedIn you have 2 decades of experience on board. And I want to ask questions about best practices for being on the board, being helpful for early stage startups. So let's talk about pre-Series A type of startups. What is the best way you can help them while on the board?
So I'll tell you the way that we've decided to do it at Stanley Ventures. We mainly hold board observer seats, to be clear. There's a few companies where we've been asked to sit as board members, but we really don't like the potential liability that comes along with having an actual board seat. So we really try to have board observer seats. And what we've decided to do, except in exception circumstances, is actually put someone directly from the business unit to sit in that board observer seat, because it is that eye to the market that we can bring at the board level that can really add value to the portfolio company. So I will have that business unit person actually attend the board meetings. Sometimes they invite me as a guest, and I love that, and then I will absolutely come. But I think best practices for early stage boards is really understanding what it is that you as an individual can bring. So I'm not an operator. I never founded a company before or started a company. But what I do have are amazing connections into the early stage VC community and the later stage VC community. So I can really try to add value in the area that I know I can, which is, okay, let's have a separate meeting about fundraising strategy where we're talking just about that. And I can help them think through what fundraising strategy could be optimal, and then create a target list of VCs that we want to go out and talk to, and then utilize my network to help them get in front of them. And so that's where I know I can add value. So I think it's just knowing yourself and what you can bring individually to the board and staying in that lane. That's how I operate. I get frustrated with people who are clearly not in a particular lane, but try to go over and add value in that lane. And it's so clear that they're just trying, but they don't really have the background to do it. So I just try to stay within my lane.
Very nice. And you mentioned something which is quite rare, which is you prefer or you choose people from the business unit to join the board. How do you prepare them? How do you make sure, in terms of training, in terms of setting expectations, what do you tell them and what do you ask of them before they even go to the first board meeting?
Yes, we will not let them go to the first board meeting until we put them through our official board observer training, which is run by our council. Our council runs that, so that they know what they should be contributing, and they understand where their contributions should stop. That they don't have votes, that they might want to the freshman congressman rule I was taught, when you arrive into a new situation, you might want to just sit back and see what the lay of the land is like, assess the personalities, and then figure out where you can add value. But we absolutely put them through official training before they start.
Very nice. And in terms of setting expectation of sharing back information back to Ventures, Stanley Ventures, is there any set of expectations or?
We write into our documents exactly what they have the right to do. And so all of our portfolio companies know that the board book is shared back to the ventures team, because we need that information, market our portfolio and all of that great stuff. So all of those expectations are set out up front, so that there are no surprises. And I will say that because we put somebody from the business in the board observer role, we are often asked in part of the board meeting to recuse ourselves, because there may be sensitive strategic topics that they don't want us to hear, which we completely respect, and then we recuse ourselves.
That makes a lot of sense. I have one more question. I want to be on recruitment, and I will use a question from the audience, Adriana. She's asking any tip for anyone that want to go from VC to CVC, how deep it can be, the knowledge on M&A. And my recruitment question was really about what type of skills are you looking at when you recruit externally? And so maybe here's a question would be, how valuable do you think someone coming from a financial VC would be to you?
I think they would be extremely valuable if they were coming into a deal doer position, into an investment manager position. I think that anybody who's working in an institutional VC fund can learn the business, right? Could come in and learn Stanley's business within a year and a half. And I think those skill sets are easily transferable. Maybe not as transferable into the CVBD role. That's a totally different skill set, but certainly easily transferable into the actual investment manager role.
I agree.
Yeah.
No, I agree. And that's why Anil and Andrew, my two investment directors, I wanted them to come actually outside TDK because I didn't want them to have any filters about what the future of TDK would be. If you're in the company for too long, you may already have filters about what the company is going to become. And you want to avoid that when you actually have a mission of exploring what could be the disruptions of the future.
No question.
Dina, it was really enjoyable interview. I learned a lot. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun. I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you. Yes, and hopefully soon we become co-investors.
I'm betting on it. I hope it happens. Okay.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.